Going into the final round of Norway chess, no less than 4 players shared the lead. But there were 2 players just behind, Aronian and Anand, just a half point behind. So if one of them could win, they would still be in with a shot. So I'm going to show you the game between Sergei Karjakin, who I'm afraid not having a great tournament, and Vishwanathan Anand, still in with a shot. So Anand has black here. And it's a solid start. Well, Vishy doesn't tend to gamble that much. But, of course, he's incredibly well prepared. And if the opportunity presents itself, then he will go for it. And he probably wasn't too unhappy with the opening on the board. So this particular variation, Bishop f4, can lead to very sharp positions, but it's a real theoretical battle. And this way of playing with castles queenside, this came to prominence in the late 1980s after a spectacular win in the Soviet Championship by Mikhail Gurevich. And after that, Garry Kasparov took it up, and well, it became really the variation. But since then, well, a lot of the analysis has been refined. Of course, computers help with that. The old move here is Bishop e7. But Anand played a move, knight e4, which, well, looks very aggressive, but somehow in the past was discredited after a very powerful win by Kasparov. But let's see what happened. Of course, Anand has come to the board very well prepared. Now, if this knight is taken, the pawn is taken here, then this actually leads to a draw. I won't spoil it for you. You can look that up if you wish. But the move knight b5, as played by Kasparov and others, was thought to present real problems. So sometimes knight c7, sometimes even bishop c7 can be very annoying. But a6 pushes the knight into c7, and now e5. Strangely enough, Karjakin has also had exactly this with black. He had this against Ivanchuk last year, and Ivanchuk in that game played knight takes, and Karjakin took the bishop and he ended up losing. In fact, if he plays knight takes f2, as I'm sure Vishy would have done, then this actually is fine for black. So for example, after queen f2 here, and well, black's pieces are actually pretty good here, and this bishop is coming out quickly. So, you know, there is very decent play for black, and the king on c1 isn't that secure. Could be tucked away a bit better. Anyway, again, if you're very interested in the theory, that's kind of an overview. But instead, Karjakin here played the old Kasparov move. So we're following an old game of Kasparov's against Vaganyan from 1992, and there Vaganyan protected the knight on e4, and Kasparov sacrificed an exchange, and he won the game very, very quickly. Actually, his pieces were just too strong. But instead, Anand took on f4. I think this is quite an important game from a theoretical point of view, actually. Queen takes. So after that little trade, I mean, these last moves virtually forced. You can take on e3 if you want to. White would be a pawn up, but black's pieces are pretty good here, and white has yet to develop on the king side. This rook is slightly oddly placed. So after this, well, this could lead to a draw straight away. As Anand said after the game, a lot of these very sharp lines are now thought to lead to a draw. Computers find ways to play the position. So that's a possible continuation. Or if white wants to just take there, and well, for the pawn, black has very nice piece play. You can see white's pieces just aren't coordinated. So that was taking on e3, but instead bishop d3 threatens mate. So g6, and only then Karjakin recaptured with the pawn this time. If queen takes e3, then again we just push the rook, and then knight a5 gives black excellent play. You know, if we could put the pawn back on c2 and put the king on b1, then we could talk about playing for white, but with the pawn on c4 doesn't look nice. So Karjakin played pawn takes, and Anand played the bishop to e6, good solid square, and the queen shifted over to h4. So white still has ambitions to attack on the king side. Why not? Here, queen d6 is interesting, hitting both these. This is quite playable for black. And after this, well, it starts to get very sharp indeed. Well, white can play queen e4 here, and that's probably okay for white. And there's another very interesting way to play knight e4, and then sacrificing the knight here. And you win the queen, but black is probably okay there. Obviously, very, very complicated. But Anand is a much steadier player. You know, he doesn't chance his arm in that way. A bit too unclear for him. He prefers to play solid moves, sound moves. So he just brings his rook into play, and he's ready to pile up here. Anand is such a practical player, such a pragmatic player. You know, it's not his style to start grabbing things. He prefers to bring all his pieces into play first. So in this position, Karjakin played bishop e4. If knight g5, then we can see a very obvious reason why the rook came to e8, and that's now f6 defends the pawn on h7, and after this the rook recaptures. Although black is still a pawn down, actually he has tremendous compensation because the pawn is attacked on e3. His king side is now safe because the queen guards along the 7th rank, and that bishop at some moments will hit e5. Looks very pleasant indeed. That queen could indeed end up on e7. And once again, you know, what is this pawn doing on c4 with the slightly open king? And white's forces don't coordinate very well. So instead of knight g5, Karjakin played bishop e4. Queen b6, hitting the rook. Now it all starts to get very tricky again. Of course, that queen would like to take the pawn here. Queen h6. And now there's fascinating variation. Anand was considering queen takes rook, knight g5, threatening mate. So black has to take the pawn. And now he originally thought that he could play queen takes e4 check, with the idea of knight takes and bishop f5. You take the knight, and black must be winning this position. But he suddenly realised that after queen takes, you don't take the queen, but the king just hides in the corner, and then queen takes h7 on the next move. In this situation, in fact, black can survive by taking the knight and then taking on c4. I think white would really struggle to win that position, but Anand is playing more ambitiously. He doesn't need to take that rook. I think by this stage he realised that actually things, could be promising for black here. He's a pawn down, but he has very good compensation. So f5. hitting the bishop. Knight g5, threatening checkmate. Rook f7. So it's getting very tricky indeed. So that defends the pawn here, and you can see that rook is in perhaps a little spot of trouble. If knight takes rook, then we'll take mate threatened again on h7, rook here, and in this position we can see once again that white's exposed king causes problems for him, and black has a very clear advantage. Once again, beautifully coordinated pieces, classic Anand actually, and white's pieces again in different corners of the board. You know, every picture tells a story. It's not winning for black, but it's certainly a very pleasant position for black to play. Back to this position. So rook f7 just played to defend h7. Now bishop d5, getting very tricky again. If that's taken, then something nasty is going to happen here. So bishop takes and rook takes, and queen takes e3 check, and rook e7, already looking definitely more pleasant for black, even though the queen is very active here. But with white's king is also slightly exposed, but it's black's centralized queen which is causing white some difficulties here. And it was at this moment that Karjakin cracked. He's under pressure here. A move that he'd like to play is something like rook d7 to try and increase the pressure, you know, threaten knight h7, but actually this loses. Rook takes here and queen f1 check, and then we take here and the rook comes down. Okay, I'll play this one out for you. Here b3 rook check, and if here then this one. So how does white continue here? Well, rook d6 is perhaps a good idea, and well, black can get a draw if he wants to like this, and then this will result in a draw by perpetual check, and the king has to go back to g8 if instead, and then it's a draw. If instead rook f7, then this actually wins, because I can play rook e1 check here. That's the problem for black. But black doesn't have to take the pawn, and could instead perhaps go on with a5 and try to press white on the queen side. And this is still extremely tricky. In this case, rook takes does not force a draw, because here you can block with rook g7 and the rook is defended. And it's not absolutely obvious how white plays here. I mean, white can wait, and maybe it's also difficult for black to make progress here. Objectively, it's still balanced. But instead of rook d6, Karjakin played a terrible blunder. h4, not obviously a blunder, but there is a huge problem with this move. Knight e5 threatens to win the queen, and there is no really good defense to this. So for example, after rook d8, we give up the queen and just trap white's queen at the other end of the board. Now, Karjakin can escape. He played knight f3 in order to bring the queen back, but now black is winning a pawn, and this was the game continuation. And knight g4, and after this the queen retreated, and watch out for knight e3 as well. So that's why Karjakin wanted to trade queens. And in this position, Anand is simply a clear pawn up with a very easy position to play. One possible idea is to actually just bring the king up the board. The knight will move away, and then the king will come all the way into g3 to hassle those white pawns. Objectively, I think this position is lost, but white can keep fighting. But Karjakin made another blunder, h5, and after this, forking rook and pawn, he loses a second pawn, and that was that. He resigned the game. So I think of an excellent game from Viswanathan Anand, and he's had a good tournament. He had his one disaster against Caruana, but apart from that, I think he's played excellently, and we're seeing this renaissance from him this year. Anand really over the past year has really, well, we're seeing the old Vishy, and we're seeing what a class act he is. Of course, don't forget, he won the World Rapid Championship in Saudi at the end of December. And yeah, he's playing extremely well. He must be very pleased. And, well, I'm delighted that he's still playing excellently. So that meant, with that victory, that Anand still had a chance to win the tournament. He had to wait and see what happened on the other boards. Carlsen drew very quickly with Vacher Le Grave, so he was now equal with Anand, and they had to wait to see what happened in the game between Fabiano Caruana and Wesley So. Nakamura also drew fairly quickly, so he was even with them. But yeah, what happened in the game between Caruana and Wesley So, you can see that. Just click on the link and you'll see what happened at the end of this tournament.